Life has a funny way of looking perfect right before it falls apart. That's exactly how things were for Alexander Pierce, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, overlooking the glittering San Francisco Bay. At 42, he had built Pierce Technologies from a small startup in his garage into a $50 billion empire. The headlines called him a genius, a visionary, a modern-day king of Silicon Valley. But Alexander knew the truth. Behind every successful man was an even more extraordinary woman. His wife Elena had been there since the beginning, back when his office was a beaten-down desk in their tiny apartment. She would bring him coffee at midnight, listen to his endless rambling about coding problems, and somehow still manage her demanding shifts at the hospital. Elena wasn't just any doctor, she was one of the most promising neurosurgeons in California. She had graduated top of her class from Stanford Medical School, where they first met. Alexander had been giving a guest lecture about tech startups, trying to impress everyone with his first minor success. Instead of being starstruck like the others, Elena had challenged his views on healthcare technology, pointing out flaws in his proposal that no one else had noticed. He fell in love with her brilliant mind first, then her kind heart, and finally, her unwavering strength. Within a year, they were married in a small ceremony by the beach. Elena had worn a simple white dress, her dark hair dancing in the wind, and Alexander had never seen anything more beautiful. Their early years were a perfect balance of ambition and love. While Alexander's company grew, Elena built her reputation in the medical field. They would spend Sunday mornings planning their dreams over homemade pancakes, his always slightly burnt, hers perfect. They talked about having children, building a family together, creating a legacy bigger than just business success. But life had other plans. After 3 years of trying naturally, they discovered conceiving wouldn't be easy for them. Elena took it harder than she showed, but she never let it dim her smile. They started IVF treatments, facing each disappointment together, holding each other through the tough nights. Their dedication to each other seemed to make everything else possible. Pierce Technologies expanded rapidly, launching revolutionary products that changed the tech landscape. Elena became the youngest head of neurosurgery at her hospital, saving lives with her steady hands and innovative approaches. They moved into a beautiful home in the prestigious Pacific Heights neighborhood with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge that still took their breath away every morning. "We've made it," Alexander would say, wrapping his arms around Elena as they watched the sunset from their terrace. She would lean back into him, her presence grounding him despite all his success. The media loved them. The power couple who proved you could have it all. Magazine covers featured their story. The billionaire and the brain surgeon, a modern love story. Then came the day that would change everything, though nobody knew it at the time. Pierce Technologies was launching a new marketing division, and the board had recommended bringing in fresh talent. That's when Sophia Martinez walked into their lives. At 25, she was a marketing prodigy who had already made waves in the tech industry. Her presentations were flawless, her strategies innovative, and her ambition obvious to everyone. Elena noticed the small changes first. Alexander started staying later at the office, claiming the new division needed his direct oversight. His phone would buzz more frequently during their dinner dates, which became increasingly rare. He stopped joining her for their Sunday pancake tradition, always having some urgent meeting or conference call. Still, Elena trusted him completely. After all, they had built their life on a foundation of love, respect, and shared dreams. She focused on their latest round of IVF, holding on to hope that this time would be different. The fertility doctors were optimistic, using a new protocol that showed promising results. What Elena didn't know was that across town, in sleek conference rooms and private restaurants, her husband was slowly falling into a different life. Sophia's youth and energy reminded Alexander of his early days. The hunger for success, the thrill of taking risks, the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The perfect life they had built was about to shatter. But on this particular autumn evening, as Elena prepared for another IVF procedure, she still believed in their love story. She still thought they were unbreakable. In their bedroom, she looked at their wedding photo. Alexander's eyes crinkled with joy, her face glowing with happiness, unaware that sometimes the things we think will last forever are the ones that slip away the fastest. The city lights twinkled below their window. the same ones they used to count together during their first years of marriage. Elena touched her stomach gently, whispering a quiet prayer for the future she still believed they would share. Tomorrow would change everything, but tonight, in this moment, their perfect life still existed in her heart. The morning everything fell apart started like any other. Elena woke up early, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The latest IVF treatment had gone well, and though she hadn't taken a test yet, something felt different this time. She touched her stomach gently, allowing herself to hope just a little. Alexander's side of the bed was cold. He hadn't come home again. These days, that wasn't unusual. She picked up her phone, expecting to see his usual text apologizing for sleeping at the office. Instead, there was nothing, just the empty screen reflecting her tired eyes. As she made her morning tea, Elena tried to remember the last time they'd had a real conversation, not just the quick exchanges about schedules or the polite small talk that had replaced their once deep discussions. When had the silence between them grown so loud? The hospital called. One of her patients needed emergency surgery. Elena welcomed the distraction. In the operating room, she was still whole, still herself. Her hands never shook, her mind never wandered. She was Dr. Pierce, the surgeon who could make the impossible possible. After saving her patient's life, Elena sat in her office, finally allowing herself to check her phone. That's when she saw it. A text message that hadn't been meant for her. Alexander had accidentally sent it to her instead of its intended recipient. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Meeting the lawyers tomorrow about moving things forward. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the desk. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Elena read the message again and again, each word burning into her mind. She thought about all the late nights, the missed dinners, the distant looks. How had she been so blind? With trembling fingers, she called Alexander's office. His secretary's voice was oddly hesitant when she said he was in a meeting with Sofia from marketing. Elena thanked her quietly and hung up. Of course, it all made sense now. The young, brilliant Sofia who had breathed new life into Pierce Technologies, who had apparently breathed new life into Elena's husband as well. Elena sat there for hours, watching the sun move across her office wall. She thought about the pregnancy test waiting at home, about the dreams they'd built together, about the life they planned. When her phone rang again, displaying Alexander's name, she almost didn't answer. Elena, his voice was cold, businesslike. We need to talk. I'll be home for dinner. She knew that tone. It was the same one he used when firing employees or ending business partnerships. Yes, she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. We do. The drive home was a blur. Elena moved through their house like a ghost, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. The framed photos on the walls seemed to mock her, smiling faces frozen in happier times. She changed out of her scrubs into a simple black dress, the one Alexander had once said made her look elegant. He arrived exactly at 7, perfectly put together in an expensive suit. There was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, no trace of the man who had once written her love notes and surprised her with breakfast in bed. I think we both know this isn't working anymore, he started, standing by the window where they used to watch sunsets together. We've grown apart. I've met someone who understands me, who shares my vision for the future. Elena listened silently as he explained how he and Sofia had connected, how their relationship had developed naturally, how he felt young again. He spoke about their marriage like a failed business venture, analyzing where things had gone wrong with clinical detachment. I've already spoken to my lawyers, he continued, pulling out a thick envelope. They've prepared everything. I'm offering you a generous settlement. The house in Napa, a substantial alimony, your choice of cars. Elena thought about the pregnancy test she still hadn't taken, about the possibility of new life growing inside her even as her marriage crumbled. She thought about telling him, about using this potential child to hold on to him. But looking at this stranger wearing her husband's face, she knew she couldn't. Keep it, she said quietly, standing up. Keep all of it. I don't want anything from you. For the first time that evening, Alexander looked surprised. He had expected tears, accusations, perhaps even begging. Instead, Elena walked to their bedroom and returned with a small bag. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her heart. I hope she makes you happy, Alexander. I really do." She walked past him, her head held high. At the door, she paused for just a moment, remembering all the times she'd crossed this threshold with joy in her heart. She thought about telling him about the IVF, about her hopes for this last treatment. But some truths, she decided, were better kept as secrets. The next morning, Elena took the pregnancy test in a small hotel room across town. As she watched 2 pink lines appear, then 4, then 6, she realized God had a strange sense of humor. Quadruplets. She was carrying 4 tiny lives inside her, 4 reasons to be stronger than she'd ever been. She looked at herself in the mirror, touching her still flat stomach. "It's just us now, little ones," she whispered. "But don't worry, we're going to be just fine." Across town, Alexander was having breakfast with Sofia, already planning their future together. He had no idea that in letting Elena walk away, he had lost not just his wife, but the miracle they had both dreamed of for so long. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over. Elena realized this as she stepped off the plane in Boston, leaving behind the glittering world she had shared with Alexander. The divorce papers were signed, her resignation from the hospital submitted, and her old life packed away in just 2 suitcases. The city welcomed her with a gentle snow, so different from San Francisco's foggy embrace. She had chosen Boston carefully. A prestigious medical center had been trying to recruit her for years, and now their offer felt like a lifeline. More importantly, it was a place where no one knew her as Mrs. Pierce, the billionaire's wife. Her new apartment was small but bright, overlooking a quiet street lined with maple trees. The landlady, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Chen, didn't recognize Elena's name from the tabloids that were now splashing headlines about Alexander's whirlwind romance with Sofia. 2 months after divorce, tech billionaire announces engagement to young marketing genius, the headlines screamed. Elena unpacked slowly, carefully placing her medical books on shelves and hanging her clothes in the closet. She deliberately left the bottom drawers empty. Soon she would need them for baby clothes. 4 sets of everything. The thought still made her dizzy. Her first appointment with her new obstetrician confirmed what she already knew: she was carrying quadruplets. "It's extremely rare with IVF," the doctor explained, pointing to 4 tiny heartbeats flickering on the screen. "Each baby has their own amniotic sac, which is good. But this will be a high-risk pregnancy." Elena nodded, already thinking like a doctor rather than a patient. She knew the statistics, the risks, the complications that could arise. But when she looked at those 4 tiny heartbeats, all she felt was love. The pregnancy wasn't easy to hide at work. By 12 weeks, her slim frame was already showing changes, but the medical center proved to be everything she had hoped for. Her new colleagues respected her skills in the operating room, and her department head was understanding about her condition. "Dr. Pierce," he said during one of their meetings, "your surgical techniques are revolutionary. We're lucky to have you, and we'll support you through this journey." He didn't ask about the father, didn't mention the gossip that occasionally floated through medical circles about her past. As her belly grew, Elena found herself building a new kind of life. She made friends with other doctors, joined a support group for expectant mothers, and spent evenings preparing for the baby's arrival. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a godsend, helping her set up the nursery and teaching her to knit tiny booties. Back in California, Alexander's face was everywhere, opening new company branches, attending charity galas with Sofia on his arm. Elena stopped reading the news. Instead, she focused on the little flutters in her stomach that gradually turned into strong kicks. 4 different personalities making themselves known. The babies were active at night, keeping her awake. During these quiet hours, Elena would talk to them, sharing stories about her day, her hopes for their future. She never mentioned Alexander, never spoke about the past. These children would know love, not loss. Her new colleagues threw her a surprise baby shower in the hospital break room. There were cupcakes with tiny footprints made of frosting and 4 of everything: blankets, onesies, tiny hats. Elena found herself crying, overwhelmed by their kindness. "You're not alone," her friend Lisa from pediatrics told her, squeezing her hand. "We're your family now." The pregnancy progressed week by week, defying the odds. Elena's medical knowledge told her how miraculous it was: 4 healthy babies growing perfectly. She had to stop performing surgeries at 6 months, her belly too big to stand comfortably at the operating table. Instead, she focused on research and consulting, her mind still sharp even as her body adapted to its precious cargo. One evening, as she sat in her favorite rocking chair by the window, Elena felt a different kind of movement. She placed her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the babies shift. One kicked high, another low, like they were playing their own private game. "You're going to change the world," she whispered to them. "Not because of who your father is, but because of who you'll choose to be." The nursery was finally ready, 4 cribs arranged in a circle, walls painted a soft green that reminded her of hope. Mrs. Chen had helped her hang delicate paper cranes from the ceiling, 100 of them, a wish for each baby's future. Elena looked around the room, touching each crib gently. She thought about Alexander, about how he had no idea he was about to become a father of 4. Part of her had been tempted to tell him, especially on hard days when the pregnancy felt overwhelming. But then she would remember his cold eyes as he handed her the divorce papers, the casual way he had discarded their years together. No, these babies deserved better than a father who could walk away so easily. They deserved the kind of love that stayed, that fought, that believed in miracles. The kind of love she would give them, enough for both parents. As she turned out the nursery light, Elena caught her reflection in the window. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, where 4 hearts beat in sync with hers. She didn't see a billionaire's ex-wife or a woman who had lost everything. She saw a mother, a fighter, a woman who was building something more valuable than any fortune, a family built on love alone. The first year with Quadruplets tested everything Elena thought she knew about strength. The babies arrived on a snowy December morning, 3 boys and a girl, each perfect in their own way. She named them Daniel, Thomas, Michael, and little Grace, strong names for strong babies who had fought their way into the world 6 weeks early but healthy. From the moment they were born, there was no denying their father's genes. All 4 had Alexander's distinctive gray eyes and dimpled smile. Daniel, the oldest by 2 minutes, had his determined chin. Thomas inherited his analytical gaze, always watching and thinking. Michael got his easy charm, while Grace had his quick, bright laugh. The early days were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious little sleep. Elena's tiny apartment became a carefully orchestrated command center. Mrs. Chen proved invaluable, helping with the babies while Elena caught quick naps between their demanding schedule. The other residents in the building took turns bringing meals, doing laundry, or just holding a baby so Elena could shower. "It takes a village," Mrs. Chen would say, cradling Grace while Elena fed the boys. "And you found yours." By day, Elena worked from home, reviewing patient files and consulting on complex cases via video calls. Her babies napped in a row of bassinets beside her desk, their peaceful breathing providing the soundtrack to her work. At night, she would sit in the rocking chair, one baby in her arms and the others nearby, marveling at how life could change so completely. As the babies grew, so did Elena's reputation in the medical field. She published groundbreaking research on pediatric neurosurgery, drawing from her experience as both a doctor and a mother. The medical center created a flexible schedule that allowed her to perform surgeries while maintaining time with her children. The kids started showing their individual personalities early. Daniel was the leader, always first to try new things. Thomas could spend hours figuring out how his toys worked. Michael never met a stranger, charming everyone he met, while Grace had a quiet wisdom that seemed beyond her years. Elena watched them grow with a mixture of joy and bittersweet awareness. Every milestone reminded her of what Alexander was missing: first words, first steps, first tiny teeth breaking through. Sometimes, when the children were asleep, she would look at old photos from her past life, trying to imagine Alexander's reaction to having 4 babies at once. The media occasionally ran stories about Alexander and Sophia's glamorous life: charity galas, business expansions, vacation homes. But Elena's world was filled with different kinds of riches: finger paintings on the fridge, group hugs that nearly knocked her over, 4 different versions of "I love you, Mommy" before bed. By the time the Quadruplets turned 3, Elena had established herself as one of Boston's top neurosurgeons. Her research was saving lives, and her surgical techniques were being taught in medical schools. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had achieved more professional success as a single mother of 4 than she ever had as a billionaire's wife. The children started preschool together, a milestone that both terrified and relieved Elena. They were inseparable, their own little unit. Teachers marveled at how they looked out for each other. If Thomas was shy about joining a game, Daniel would lead the way. If Grace was sad, Michael would make silly faces until she laughed. Their 5th birthday party was a joyful chaos of superhero capes and princess crowns. Elena watched her children play with their friends, their laughter filling the small community center they'd rented. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with 4 different birthday cakes, each decorated to match its recipient's personality. "You've done an amazing job with them," Lisa said, now Elena's closest friend and the children's honorary aunt. "They're incredible kids." Elena smiled, watching Grace help Thomas blow out his candles while the other 2 boys cheered. "They made it easy," she replied. "They gave me a reason to be strong when I thought I'd lost everything." That evening, after the party mess was cleaned up and 4 tired children were tucked into bed, Elena sat in her favorite chair by the window. The kids' newest artwork decorated the walls, family drawings that always showed 5 people, 4 small figures and 1 tall one. They never asked about their father, seeming content in their world of 5. She thought about how far they'd come from those first terrifying days of pregnancy when she'd wondered if she was strong enough to do this alone. Now she knew the truth. She had never really been alone. She had 4 little partners in this adventure, 4 reasons to push harder, dream bigger, love deeper. As she checked on each sleeping child, Elena felt nothing but gratitude. Daniel clutched his favorite dinosaur, Thomas had fallen asleep reading, Michael was sprawled across his bed like a starfish, and Grace was curled up with her stuffed unicorn. 4 different dreams playing out in 4 peaceful minds. She had no way of knowing that soon their carefully built world would collide with the past she'd left behind. That somewhere in Boston, at a medical conference she was scheduled to attend, Alexander Pierce was about to discover what he'd really lost when he let her walk away. Alexander Pierce was used to commanding attention when he walked into a room. But today, striding through Boston General Hospital's pristine corridors, he felt strangely out of place. The medical conference where he was scheduled to speak about healthcare technology seemed less important than the memories these hospital halls stirred up. Everything reminded him of Elena. The squeak of rubber shoes on polished floors, the faint antiseptic smell, even the way doctors rushed past with that purposeful stride she used to have. 5 years had passed, but somehow being in a hospital made it feel like yesterday. His marriage to Sophia was showing cracks he couldn't ignore. She had grown tired of his long hours, just as he had grown tired of her constant social media updates and endless parties. The passion that had seemed worth destroying his marriage for had faded into something hollow. Lost in thought, he'd almost missed the sound at first, children's laughter, bright and clear, echoing down the hallway. Then a small voice called out, "Mommy, look what I drew." Alexander turned the corner and froze. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing to the scene before him. Elena stood there, more beautiful than he remembered, her dark hair shorter now, but her smile just as warm. She was surrounded by 4 small children, all about 5 years old. 4 children who had his eyes, his dimples, his features so clearly stamped on their small faces that it felt like looking at old photos of himself. One of the boys was showing Elena a drawing, while another arranged toy cars in a neat line on a nearby chair. The 3rd boy was spinning in circles, making his tiny lab coat flutter, while a little girl with pigtails carefully copied words from a medical chart into a small notebook. Alexander's knees felt weak. He gripped the wall for support, his mind racing. The timing, the IVF they'd done right before. It all suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. Elena saw him at that moment. Her smile faded, replaced by a protective expression he'd never seen before. She pulled the children closer, instinctively shielding them even as they remained absorbed in their activities. "Mom, can we go see the babies in the nursery again?" the spinning boy asked, finally getting dizzy enough to stop. "Michael." Alexander's mind supplied from nowhere, recognizing his own childhood energy in the child's movements. "Not today, sweetheart," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the situation. "We need to get you all home for dinner." "But Mom," the boy with the drawing protested. Daniel, Alexander somehow knew. "You promised we could watch your surgery video." "Tomorrow," Elena said firmly. "Grace, Thomas, pack up your things, please." The little girl and the quiet boy with the cars immediately began gathering their belongings, moving with the synchronized efficiency of children used to following directions together. Alexander stood rooted to the spot, unable to speak or move. 5 years. He had missed 5 years. These were his children, not just one baby, but 4. 4 little lives he'd known nothing about. 4 pieces of himself walking around in miniature form. The children finally noticed him, their gray eyes, his eyes, studying him with varying degrees of curiosity. Grace, the little girl, tilted her head in a gesture so familiar it made his heart ache. It was Elena's gesture, the one she used to make when solving a particularly complex medical puzzle. "Mom," Thomas said quietly, clutching his cars. "That man looks like the people in our picture books." Alexander realized with a start that they had his old medical textbooks, the ones with his tech innovations featured in them. Of course, Elena would have kept them. They were valuable medical references. His children had been seeing his face in textbooks without knowing it was their father. "Yes, honey," Elena said, her voice gentle but firm. "Dr. Pierce is here for the conference, but we need to go now. Mrs. Chen is making your favorite dinner." The way she said his name, Dr. Pierce, not Alexander, felt like a wall being built between them, between him and these children who shared his blood, but not his name. "Elena," he finally managed to say, his voice rough. "Please." She shook her head slightly, gathering the children's backpacks. "Not here," she whispered. "Not now." As she ushered the children away, each of them waving politely as they'd clearly been taught to do with adults, Alexander felt the full weight of his choices crash down on him. He watched them walk away, his family, these strangers who shared his DNA. The little one named Grace looked back once, her curious eyes meeting his. In that brief moment, Alexander saw himself, Elena, and all the dreams they'd once shared reflected in her tiny face. Then she turned away, skipping to catch up with her brothers, leaving Alexander alone in the hallway with the magnitude of what he'd lost. His phone buzzed, Sophia, probably wondering why he wasn't at their dinner reservation. But Alexander couldn't move. All he could think about were 4 pairs of gray eyes, 4 dimpled smiles, and 5 years of memories he could never get back. The rain fell softly outside the small coffee shop where Elena had agreed to meet Alexander the next day. She'd chosen a quiet place far from the hospital, arriving early to collect her thoughts. The children were safe at school, unaware that their world was about to change. Alexander walked in exactly on time, looking less polished than yesterday. His expensive suit was slightly wrinkled, his eyes red from what appeared to be a sleepless night. He slid into the seat across from her, his hands wrapping around a coffee cup he didn't drink from. "Quadruplets," he said quietly, the word heavy with 5 years of missed moments. All this time. Elena watched him carefully, seeing the questions fighting their way to the surface. She had rehearsed this conversation countless times in her mind, but now that it was happening, no script seemed adequate. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice cracking slightly. "They're my children too, Elena. I had a right to know." "Did you?" Elena's voice was soft but firm. "The man who handed me divorce papers and walked away without a backward glance. The man who was so eager to start his new life that he couldn't even wait until our marriage was officially over." Alexander flinched. Images from yesterday's encounter flashed through his mind. Daniel's confident stance, Thomas's thoughtful gaze, Michael's boundless energy, Grace's gentle smile. All of them perfect combinations of himself and Elena. "I've missed everything," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Their first words, first steps. "Yes," Elena agreed, no triumph in her voice, only sadness. "You missed Daniel learning to walk at 9 months, determined to keep up with life. You missed Thomas teaching himself to read at 3 because he wanted to understand his world. You missed Michael making friends with every child at the park and Grace singing lullabies to her brothers when they're sad." Each detail hit Alexander like a physical blow. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking slightly, and showed her the screen. He'd been up all night looking at old photos of himself as a child. The resemblance to the boys was uncanny. "They're thriving," Elena continued. "They're happy, healthy, and loved. They excel in school, have many friends, and support each other in ways that amaze their teachers. They've never felt like they were missing anything." "But they're missing their father," Alexander countered, a hint of his old authority creeping into his voice. Elena's eyes flashed. A father is more than DNA, Alexander. A father is someone who shows up, who stays, who puts his children before his own desires. Tell me, in these past 5 years with Sophia, have you become that man? The question hung between them. Alexander thought about his marriage to Sophia, how quickly the passion had faded into photo shoots and public appearances. How empty their huge house felt, how meaningless his billions seemed now. I want to know them, he said finally. Please, Elena. I'll do whatever it takes. I've changed. Have you? Elena asked quietly. Or did you just realize you made a mistake? There's a difference, Alexander. And my children aren't a way for you to feel better about your choices. Our children, he corrected gently. Our children, Elena acknowledged, who have never asked for expensive toys or vacation homes. Who are happy with Sunday pancake breakfasts and bedtime stories. Who believe that love is shown through presents, not presents. Are you ready to be that kind of father? Alexander thought about the children he'd seen yesterday, how complete their family unit had seemed. I have so much I could give them, he offered. They don't need your money, Elena said firmly. If you want to be in their lives, you need to understand that. They need time, patience, understanding. They need a father who will show up for school plays and science fairs, who will listen to their stories and fears, who will put them first. Always. She pulled out her phone, showing him a recent photo. The quadruplets were at the beach, building a sandcastle together. Their faces were lit with joy, their gray eyes sparkling with life. This is who they are, she said softly. 4 unique, wonderful people who deserve more than a part-time father who sees them as a way to relive his past or fix his mistakes. Alexander stared at the photo, seeing what Elena meant. These weren't accessories to add to his perfect life. They were real people, with hearts that could be broken, trust that could be betrayed. What do I need to do, he asked, his voice hollow with the weight of understanding. First, you need to be sure, Elena replied. Because if you come into their lives and leave again, I'll never forgive you. Take some time. Think about what being a father really means. Think about whether you're ready to put 4 other people's needs before your own. Then, if you're truly ready, we can talk about small steps. She stood up, gathering her things. They have a school play next month. Think about what I've said, and let me know if you're ready to sit in the audience and just watch. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as a father who wants to learn who his children are. As she walked away, Alexander remained seated, staring at his untouched coffee. On his phone, the photo of 4 laughing children at the beach seemed to ask a question he wasn't sure he could answer. Was he finally ready to be the man his children deserved? 1 month could change everything. Alexander learned this as he sat in the back row of an elementary school auditorium, watching 4 precious children perform in their school play. The quadruplets were playing trees in a forest, their handmade costumes crafted with obvious care and love. Even as trees, their personalities shone through. Daniel standing tall and proud, Thomas swaying thoughtfully, Michael adding extra wiggle to his leaves, and Grace helping younger children remember their lines. His divorce from Sophia had been finalized last week. The media had a field day with headlines about the billionaire's failed second marriage, but for once, Alexander didn't care about public opinion. His focus was entirely on 4 small figures on stage. Elena sat a few rows ahead, recording the performance on her phone. She looked happy, relaxed, surrounded by other parents who clearly considered her family. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, beaming with grandmother-like pride at her 4 little trees. After the show, Alexander watched from a distance as Elena hugged each child, praising their performances. He'd spent the past month making changes in his life, stepping back from daily company operations, buying a small house in Boston, attending parenting classes that Elena had suggested. Each decision felt right in a way that his previous choices hadn't. "Mom," he heard Grace ask, her voice carrying in the crowded auditorium, "is that our dad in the back? The one from the medical books?" Elena knelt down to her children's level, something Alexander had noticed she always did when having important conversations with them. "Yes, sweetie. Dr. Pierce asked if he could watch your play. How do you feel about that?" The quadruplets huddled together, having one of their silent conversations that Elena had told him about. It was Thomas who spoke first, surprisingly. "Does he like books like I do?" he asked quietly. "Is he good at building things?" Daniel added. Can he do funny voices for stories? Michael chimed in. Will he make you sad again? Grace whispered, showing wisdom beyond her years. Elena gathered them close. Those are all very good questions, and the truth is, we'll have to learn the answers together. But only if you want to, and only at your own pace. Alexander had spent weeks preparing for this moment. He'd learned about child psychology, researched how to build relationships with older children, even practiced conversations with his therapist. But watching his children process his existence made all the preparation feel inadequate. Slowly, carefully, Elena brought the children over to where he sat. Up close, they were even more remarkable. Daniel had a small scratch on his chin from trying to climb the highest tree in the playground. Thomas clutched a book about space that was well beyond his grade level. Michael's shoelaces were untied despite Elena's best efforts, and Grace had tiny flowers painted on her fingernails. Hello, Alexander said softly, fighting to keep his voice steady. You all did amazing in the play. Did you really make the computers that help Mom fix people's brains? Daniel asked directly, showing the same forthright nature Alexander had at his age. I did, Alexander nodded. But your mom is the real hero. She's the one who saves lives. Mom says heroes come in lots of different ways, Grace offered. Sometimes they just read you stories or help you with math. Or push you on the swings, Michael added hopefully. Or sit quietly with you in the library, Thomas whispered. Alexander felt tears pricking at his eyes. I'd like to do all those things if you'll let me. We can start slow, maybe with some stories or swing pushing. The children looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Remember what we talked about? Small steps, and you can always tell me how you feel. Over the next few months, those small steps turned into a careful dance of building trust. Alexander learned to tie pigtails for Grace, to identify different dinosaurs with Daniel, to sit in comfortable silence reading with Thomas, and to match Michael's boundless energy on the playground. His big house in California was sold, his company now run primarily by a capable CEO, while he focused on research and development from Boston. The media eventually lost interest in the story of the tech billionaire who chose family over empire. One Sunday morning, almost a year after the chance encounter in the hospital, Alexander found himself in Elena's small kitchen, trying not to burn the pancakes while 4 excited children offered cooking advice. Elena watched from the doorway, hiding a smile as Grace seriously explained that the bubbles had to be just right before flipping. You're doing it wrong, Dad, Michael laughed, using the word that had taken months to feel natural. Moms are always perfect. Well, your mom has had more practice, Alexander replied, successfully flipping a pancake to cheers from his audience. But I'm learning. And he was. Learning that wealth meant nothing compared to the way Thomas's face lit up when sharing a new discovery. Learning that success wasn't measured in stock prices, but in the trust growing in Daniel's eyes. Learning that joy wasn't found in business deals, but in Michael's uncontrollable giggles and Grace's thoughtful questions. Elena had built something priceless in his absence, a family founded on love, strength, and forgiveness. Now, as he served slightly misshapen pancakes to his children, Alexander understood that his greatest achievement wasn't the billions in his bank account or the technology he'd created. It was the chance to earn back what he'd carelessly thrown away, one pancake, one story, one moment at a time. And this time, he would make sure to get it right.